Good afternoon, Brian. It's Sunday. So both of us have gone to the movies recently. I've seen It and Annabelle Creation recently, and Wonder Woman a little bit before that. And you recently went to see Wonder Woman, and we've been talking about movies this week, and I just am sort of reminded of how expensive movies have gotten. I remember, or at least I feel like I remember, a time where you could go to the movies and the ticket perhaps cost maybe $4 or $5. I don't know if that was with a student discount or not, but I feel like I remember a time when that was the case. And the popcorn and drinks and all of the snacks were always overpriced, but that they were at least a little bit more affordable, maybe like $3 or $4 for a drink or $5 for a popcorn. But now it seems like, sometimes you can go to a movie and spend, upwards of $15 a ticket or more. And granted, those are for more expensive ones, like if you're going to IMAX 3D, but even the regular standard movies, I feel like on like a Friday or Saturday night, costs like $12 to go to the movies. And, the snacks and all that is even more on top of that. And sometimes for a couple to go out to the movies, it seems like it's a $40 expenditure. So you hear people complain often about how expensive movies have gotten and how expensive that is a way to spend your time, a thing to do. And I wanted to find out just how expensive it was. And so I did some math and some comparisons, and I have some interesting things that I have found out. So I wanted to figure out how much money you had to spend for every hour of enjoyment that you got out of the movie theater. And the last few times we went to see the movies, It was the most recent one that I saw. We went actually during the afternoon, and I think the matinee price was only like $8 or we'll say $9 for an adult. Now granted, that's more than it used to be for sure, but it's less than if you go in the evening on a Friday or Saturday, and it also was not an IMAX or a 3D movie, so this was sort of a cheaper version. This also does not include any snacks and drinks. We don't usually get too many snacks and drinks, but that's another way to save money. So for example, It, which we saw most recently, I did the math, and that works out to being $4 per hour for entertainment, which sounds not bad when you think about it. Movies are supposed to be this monumentally expensive thing you do, and but $4 per hour doesn't sound bad. I feel like spending $4 for an hour of enjoyment is reasonable. Another movie we talked about recently is Annabelle Creation. I did the math on that one. It works out to $4.95 an hour, so a little bit more expensive because it's a shorter movie, but still $5 an hour I think is reasonable. And then Wonder Woman, which we both thought was longer, so it actually gets the benefit of that, and is less than $4 an hour, $3.86, which is definitely not a bad way to spend your evening. Now, of course, this does not count any of the other benefits of, if you go to see the movie with someone, it's a shared experience, plus then afterwards you get to talk about it. You and I have talked about these movies. You can participate in online forums and discussions about it, talk with your friends about it, so you get a lot of enjoyment out of the thing aside from just the time that you spend in the theater. But I had to have something to work with, so that's what I was basing it off of, is just the time spent at the movie. So they definitely don't seem that expensive when you break it down that way. While I was doing this, I decided, I was a little bit curious and I wanted to break down some other common forms of entertainment, especially ones that generally people seem to think are expensive, and wanted to see how they stacked up against that. The first direct comparison to the movies that I could think of was actually books. Now, books are not necessarily known for being expensive, although especially if you go out and buy a brand new hardback copy of a book, it can sometimes run up to like $30, which totally is expensive. But I usually go to Ed McKay's a lot, and their books are much cheaper there. However, there are a couple books that were full price that I did this tabulation on. So for example, I am currently reading Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. This is a classic science fiction book that I have just now started getting around to reading. And I'm a relatively slow reader, so your mileage may vary. If you're a faster reader, you would, spend more money per the amount of time you spent reading the book because you would read it faster than me. But this, based on that calculation, worked out to $1.03 an hour for enjoyment. That's because I got it used, so it was $5. And it would take me probably about 5 hours to read this, so around $1 an hour, which is totally not bad and is super cheap compared to thinking about a movie. I feel like reading has sort of gone out of trend recently and fewer people read, but it's definitely a really cost-efficient way to get entertained aside from all of the other benefits and enjoyment you get out of it. If you're simply looking at how much entertainment can I get for the money that I'm spending, books are not a bad way to go. Another book that I recently read, and this one I bought new, so it includes the new price. It is a paperback, so it's not expensive as a hardback, but it's Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. The movie Arrival last year was based on one of the stories. Side note, this is one of the favorite books of mine that I've read in a long, long time. I loved all of the stories. I couldn't put it down. It's definitely one of my favorites, one that I'd recommend a lot to anybody. But this one works out to just over $2 an hour for entertainment, even though I bought it new, and so it was much more expensive than this one. It's a little bit longer, so it lasted longer. For fun, I did Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Now, this is a long time ago. I couldn't find what it cost when it initially was published, but it's probably about the same. Right now, you can get a copy for $20. That's what I used. Brand new, hardback, $20 for the book. And I figured that the initial reading would probably be about $3 an hour. However, I don't know about you, but I have read the whole Harry Potter series probably 10 times, especially the first one, because when they were being released, I would usually read the first one when it came out, and then the next year when the second one came out, I'd read the first one again to get ready, and the next year when the third one came out, I'd read the first two. So the first one has gotten read at least 7 times, once for each of the books, but I'm pretty sure it's probably closer to 10. So I did the math on that too. After 5 readings, it's only 62 cents an hour for the amount that you spent on it initially, and after 10, it's 31 cents an hour. So, you know, if you add up all the time you spent reading it, 31 cents an hour, which is definitely a great deal. And again, that doesn't take into account any of the added bonus of, you know, being a part of this whole fandom around Harry Potter and sharing that communal aspect and all of the other extra benefits from that as well. It is a really big book, one that I finished recently. Now, I don't know how much I think I got that one from somebody, so it didn't cost me, but I did see what you could get. Now, this is the cheapest you could get on Amazon used, so I didn't go for a brand new one. But for the cheapest I could find used paperback, it ended up being 48 cents an hour on the first read through, and obviously 24 cents an hour after that. So books are definitely a great way to get a lot of enjoyment for a little bit of investment. We've been playing board games recently, and some people can balk at how expensive board games are. They're sort of used to the more American board games like Scrabble and Monopoly and things, and I think, oh, 10 or 20 bucks, that's probably good. And then you see these things like Lords of Waterdeep, which is much more expensive. I looked that one up. I think it was like 35 bucks for a brand new copy of Lords of Waterdeep. However, I think we spent probably about 3 hours playing it the other day, and that was one playthrough. I imagine you could probably play through it at least 5 or 10 times before even starting to get bored, especially that game. And that would make it work out to $11.33 for the first playthrough, but only $2.27 per hour by the 5th playthrough. So board games are definitely not a super expensive, oh, they're so expensive, it's hard to afford that. Like, really, when you compare it to like reading or books, board games give you just as much entertainment. Plus, again, that doesn't count or include all of the extra aspects of, you know, communal sharing time. You're playing it with your friends, you're having a great time, you're laughing, you're enjoying yourselves and all of that. And actually, that is only based on the amount of one-person hours playing. Like, if it was a 3-hour game, that only counts for those 3 hours. But since it was all 3 of us, really 9 hours were spent playing it. So it would be even significantly cheaper when you count all the time that other people are playing. So that's just something to think about too. Codenames is a game we have that is $20 on the first playthrough, but $4 an hour by the 5th. And Scrabble, which is cheaper and, you know, more of a traditional American game, after 5 playthroughs is like $1.33 a playthrough. So clearly board games, while they can sort of seem expensive at first because you think, oh, it's just a silly board game, like why is it $40 or $50? Especially if it's something you're going to play a lot with friends, it is clearly, you know, definitely worth it and not an expensive way to spend your time, not an expensive hobby to have per se. And finally, video games. I feel like video games are often demonized as being really expensive. You know, nowadays I think a major label game usually is like $60 to buy brand new, and people think like, oh, video gaming is such an expensive hobby. It's, you know, something that only certain people can afford, and it's just so expensive I could never get into it. And really, now granted, I didn't take into account the cost of the consoles themselves, just the games, but I looked up some of the most recent big titles and figured out how much it would be, how many dollars per every hour you spent playing it based on an average amount of playtime from a couple sources, which I'll include in the description. For example, Horizon Zero Dawn is a new game. I haven't played it, I'm not sure what it's about, but based on how much it costs and about what the average playtime was, that works out to $1 per hour. So even though it's $60 to buy it, clearly you can see that it's a cheaper way to, you get more enjoyment per dollar than you would by going to the movie theater, and it's right in there with board games and books as well, and books are a really cheap way to get a lot of entertainment. Zelda Breath of the Wild, which I know you're really enjoying and I'm really excited to play at some point. Because it's such a long game, it really benefits from the fact that you can put a lot of hours into it, and it's got such a high level of enjoyment that it works out to be in just 41 cents an hour based on the amount of time that average players have played it. Skyrim is another huge game that came out a couple years ago that works at 61 cents an hour. And finally, one of yours and my favorite games, Binding of Isaac Rebirth. Based on the average number of hours that a Steam player plays on this game, costs 16 cents an hour. I feel like in general as a society we like to complain about things, and sometimes we sort of fall victim to a flaw in our psychology where we see the initial price of something, we see the sticker price, and for some reason what our mental construct of what this thing should be worth, what it should be valued at, and what it costs are not the same. We think that, oh, you know, we like to diminish the importance of video games and their legitimacy as an art form, for example, and so we like to say, oh, it's just a silly video game, you know, you're gonna spend $60 on that, you could do so much more things with that $60. But really, if you do the math like I have done, and I'm sure that there are, you know, errors I've made, but in general it seems like if you're looking to get the most amount of enjoyment, the most amount of pleasure or leisure time, video games are actually a really, really financially smart way to do that. You get so much time out of every dollar that you spent buying the game that it really, is a good way to get a lot of enjoyment out of your time. And, even, books, which can be sort of expensive to buy new, you can even buy them new and have, a couple dollars an hour, or buy them used and be even cheaper. And then, movies, which are sort of known for being like, oh, movies are so expensive these days, it's still only a few dollars an hour. Granted, they're more expensive than the other entertainment forms that I mentioned in this, but it's still not a bad way to enjoy your time. So I think that, in general, perhaps we need to stop being so worried about or making such a big deal out of things without really taking the time to think about it and comparing it to other things that we value and seeing if it's really worth it. So I hope you found this interesting, Brian. I know it was a lot of numbers, but the more I did it, the more I just found it fascinating how our initial, before I did this, I would have said oh, video games are kind of expensive. Yeah, they're kind of expensive, and movies are expensive too, but after doing the math, it really does not pan out. So I was really interested in finding all of that out, and I think that it's useful information as we go about our lives and think about the ways that we want to spend our money and the sources of enjoyment we want to seek out. So I'd love to hear what you think about it, Brian, or if you have any other entertainment forms that you'd like to do the math of and compare in a similar way. And what do you think about all this? Are these the numbers you would have expected, or was this surprising to you as it was to me? I'd love to hear your answer, and I look forward to seeing your vlog on Tuesday. Have a good night.